So I want to welcome you in person and those online to Iowa Nutrient Research Center seminar series, the fourth, I think, this semester. So we'll have them in the spring as well, but we're not going to have one in January. Correct, Malcolm and Kate? Yeah, we're starting in February, and then we're also thinking about some type of field tour, roundtable discussion maybe in May. After classes are done, so be on the lookout for that. And this month, we're really fortunate to welcome Dr. Sotirios Archontoulis, that's in the Department of Agronomy, and Dr. Crystal Liu, that's in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Organismal Biology. I believe is, if I got it right, Crystal. And so we're going to start this month. We're talking about modeling and some of the modeling work that's been done with INRC funding. Sotirios using ABSIM and Crystal with BLEM. And so they'll tell you about each of those models and work that they've been doing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sotirios for his presentation, and then we'll take one question at the end or maybe two, and then we'll move to Crystal. So he's going to talk about review of Iowa water and nitrogen balances using ABSIM modeling. So with that, Sotirios, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks everyone for attending in person or through Zoom. And I want to apologize for not being there in the room with all of you. The original plan was to be also at the AGU meeting, but it changed the last minute. So everything is going to be through Zoom. So the seminar today, the two presentations is about modeling. And the theme of the series, I like the word decadal of research. And this kind of inspired me to present some results, some modeling assessments of water and nitrogen balance and crop productivity over the last 35 years of Iowa, and share with you some modeling insights and what we learn through modeling. The work that I'm going to present today is part of two Iowa Nutrient Reduction Center projects. One was focused on improving ABSIM, and the other one is about deploying ABSIM to estimate impacts at the regional scale. Both of the projects are in collaboration with Dr. Castellano, and today I will mostly focus on the second piece, which is we deploy ABSIM at scale to estimate some impacts. And I will start with a very brief description of what is ABSIM. The name is Agricultural Production System Simulator. Many people refer it to a crop model. It's basically an advanced cropping system simulator and was designed to address the genotype by management by environment interactions. One thing that I personally like a lot about ABSIM is that it has equal focus on crop and soil processes. It's not a crop model, it's not a soil model. It has equal balance, how many processes we simulate above and below ground. A nice feature of ABSIM is the advanced management capabilities. We can simulate tide drainage, depth, spacing. We can plug in cover crops or change tillage practices or nitrogen. In terms of water balance, we are using the Richards equation. There is also a simpler version, but for Iowa, we found that it's better to use this approach, the semi-mechanistic, to simulate water balance, because it gives us the opportunity to include the shallow water tables that we have in our region. Soil profile can be user-defined. We can have as many layers as we want. And the model can simulate nitrogen and carbon cycling using conceptual pools. Many different pools and calculations are made for every layer. We have improved the model to simulate excessive moisture stress on crop yields and root growth. And we published several papers showing the performance of ABSIM with regards to nitrogen rate, organic matter, leaching, etc. Iowa State University is one of the 7 members of the ABSIM initiative, and it's the only one in the United States. And something important, ABSIM was designed to be a based model, a field model, a point model. To make the model regional, what we do is to run it in parallel, several times. And we do that by using an additional software, which is called PSIM's Parallel System for Integrating Systems. And we feed the model with lots of different input variables. In this slide on the left, you see the inputs that gets into the model, into the ABSIM model. And I have some graphs to present in the next slide: weather, soil management, cultivars, very important. And of course, we have always, when we are working with models, we have to make assumptions. Now, everything gets inside the system. The model has all the processes: the nitrogen model, the carbon model, the water model, the crop model, and then we get many outputs like yield, nitrogen balance, and water balance that I'm gonna present you in the next slides. We did lots of runs to calibrate and test the model and make sure that it represents what we know that is going on in Iowa. Now, for the next slides, I'm gonna show you aggregated data at Iowa State level. And the resolution of the simulation is 5 arc minutes, the spatial resolution. If you prefer 2,500 fields within Iowa, this is the variability that we capture within the state of Iowa. Now, few things about the inputs, extremely important when we are dealing with dynamics, temporal, and spatial. The rain, this is for the state of Iowa. It has increased over the last 35 years. The annual GDT, this is the thermal time, it has increased very slightly, pretty much no. And annual radiation, there are some discussions about that. Yes, it has increased a little bit. Fertilizer that we use inside the model was, we use data from Crystal's previous work with some changes that we made. And what we get into the model, this is very important input. It has increased the nitrogen rate by 0.7% per year. Plant density is going up, planting date is going a little bit down. So this is the first set of input. The second set of input that we put inside the model are all the soil properties, including tile drainage in the Midwest. I will not go into very detail here, but I will stay here and say a few things. It is very important to get a very good representation of the reality. In reality, the best measurement we have is the crop yields. And what you see in this graph is the simulated maize yields for the state of Iowa and the observed, the two different colors. And the R-square between measured and observed is about 0.84, but the lines are in parallel and show a yield increase of 1.6% per year. We check the model for every single county, and it simulated very well the productivity and also the flowering time. This is part of testing that we use the appropriate cultivars. And another important aspect, something that it took us quite some time, is to make sure that the model can represent the hydrology in the Corn Belt. And on the left, you see data from Surgo on water table depth, and on the right, data from the ABSIM model. These are averages over 34 years. Different colors refer to different depths to the water table. This is one test. We did several other tests at the field level with water table depth, many locations in Iowa. I show here some examples, but we were happy that the model performs well. And I show you some evidence for crop yields. We have done additional tests with soil nitrate, but I will skip everything, all the additional tests, and I will go directly to some historical trends for the water balance. And then we are gonna move to the nitrogen balance. Now, again, everything that I'm gonna show you in the next slides is simulated, no measured data from now on, except one slide. Historically, Precipitation has increased by about 0.5% per year. And evapotranspiration, according to the model, has not increased. It's pretty much a flat line with about 700 millimeters per year. Drainage has gone up and runoff has gone up as well. And if we try to relate that to the main driver, which is the precipitation, we see that there is an exponential relation between drainage and rain and runoff and rain. And somewhere here is the base. This is 540 millimeters, or if you prefer, 21 inches. And above that, any rain that we get, 50% goes to drainage and 30% goes to runoff. May be surprised with evapotranspiration here that there is no effect. And we were surprised, and we reviewed the literature and we performed some experiments. And what we learned is that evapotranspiration is pretty much the same between old hybrids and new hybrids. So we are confident that evapotranspiration being about constant, it's a good emerged property from the model. And here I show you the only measured data that I have in this presentation about soil moisture, deep soil moisture measurements for two different hybrids, all the new ones. Now, increased precipitation, increased drainage, increased runoff, and we have the same evapotranspiration. The net outcome of these inputs and outputs is the soil moisture. And I show you this on the left. 1 means the soil is saturated, and 0 means there is no water. And soil moisture in May, it has gone up, it's getting a bit wetter, and also in August, but you see there is quite some difference in moisture between May and August. And the depth to the water table, this is another outcome from the model, is going down by about, is getting shallower. In other words, 0.21% per year during May, and minus 0.1% per year in August. So it's getting wetter during this period of evaluation. A few things about the roots. Through the modeling, we didn't see any historical change with regards to the rooting depth, but something important and emerged property from the model is some relations between rooting depth in Iowa for corn and annual rain or depth to the water table. So they are both polynomial relations, and there is kind of an optimum around 35 inches annual precip for maximizing the root depth, or if you prefer 90 inches water table depth to maximize the rooting depth. And of course, there is a strong relation between precipitation and depth to the water table. Nitrogen balance. The model can simulate mineralization, gross net, nitrification, denitrification, and the partitioning of the greenhouse gas emissions, urea hydrolysis, crop and uptake, and of course, nitrogen leaching in the tiles and by each layer, including below the tile line. Now, let's stay a little bit on this graph, where we summarize all the main components of the nitrogen balance. The top line is the nitrogen fertilizer. By far is the number one, the variable with the highest numbers here. The magnitude is much higher than anything else. And this has gone up according to the inputs that we have put into the model. The grain nitrogen export is what we harvest from the field. And this is coming out of the model, is simulated from the model. And according to our simulation, there is an increase 0.9% per year. Nitrogen mineralization has not changed over the last 36 years. However, the nitrate, the residual nitrate, what is left over at harvest, it has gone down by 0.7% per year. And the nitrogen loss has increased by about 0.8% per year. You see, I use relative terms, so we have a fair comparison among water processes, yields, and nitrogen processes. The numbers may look small here, like 0.7 per year, but if you refer this to decade, this is 7. You multiply everything. Now, one metrics that we use to evaluate the performance of cropping system is the yield scale emissions. There are different ways to calculate this one. One way that I saw a lot in the literature is nitrogen loss divided with the grain yield. And when I did these calculations here, we see that there is 1% per year less nitrogen loss per unit of grain yield. This is a very desirable outcome. However, it's quite variable. If you see here the CV, the coefficient of variation, the temporal variability, and this is because the high variance there is because of the precipitation and the different shape of relations that we have between nitrogen loss and grain yield. So what I tried to do was to take the relation between nitrogen loss and yield and look the first 12 years of the evaluation period and the last 12 years. So 84 to 95 and 2008 to 2019, the blue and orange line. And by looking at this graph, what we see is for the same amount of precipitation, let's say we have 1000 millimeters, there is a clear improvement in the amount of nitrogen loss we lose per yield, per unit of yield. If there was no improvement, the blue and the orange line should have been identical, but it's not. And this is a very good evidence that things are going in the way that we work and we wanna go, better environmental performance. Dissecting this type of relation between the grain yield and actual nitrogen loss, yes, there is a big shift in the yields. We get much higher yield for the same amount of precipitation, and we see some improvements in the nitrogen loss, not as clear as for the yields. And this is average across the state of Iowa. And I did kind of the same analysis, but I focus in 2 different regions. On the left is the Des Moines lobe, a region with very wet soils, with shallow water tables. And another region, I use here the MLRA system. This is Western Iowa with deep water tables, sloppy fields. And what I notice is that this type of improvement between old years and recent years is evident across different regions. What is changing is the magnitude, which I believe is very good news, and I wanted to share this with you all. Now, let me try to summarize everything here. And on the left, I have a summary table of everything that I presented today. The variables starting from the water balance, then we talk a little bit about the roots, nitrogen balance and yield. Unfortunately, didn't have time to talk about crop biomass and crop corn stover. And here is the percent per year increase or decrease from 84 to 2009. So there are many changes over the last 36 years. In general, it is getting wetter and the water table is getting shallower. We get much higher yields, and we have improved nitrogen loss per yield, which is an important indicator of performance. And we get more biomass, which is beneficial as we talk about soil health and carbon sequestration. Of course, we don't translate everything to carbon sequestration, but we have higher CO2 uptake. At the same time, we have higher stover production, which is something we need to think more as we manage the crops for the future years and in terms of nutrient requirements. And we see changes in many changes in the management. In terms of research priorities and modeling needs, a couple of suggestions, mostly for the experimentalists, what the modelers need, and some data. We need more data from the deep soil profile. This is where the majority of information that we need and is critical we don't have. Water balance is very critical when we are going to talk about nitrogen leaching or mineralization. And one important aspect that we found to be very sensitive in the model is the role of tillage and crop residues on water balance. We need to keep up with genetics. What we learn through the modeling exercise is that genetics play a big role in both productivity and also environmental performance. We have seen changes in grain protein content which affect the crop and uptake and the amount of nitrogen that is going to be lost in the environment. So we have to keep up with the genetics. And my final suggestion is to start thinking more of a systems approach when we perform experiments. In other words, collecting yields and only yields is not enough. We have to try to get more variables to represent the system and better test the performance of simulation models. And that, I will thank you for attending my talk, and I will be very happy to answer questions.
Great job, Sotirios, keeping on time. So we have time for a question or two, either in the room or if anybody online wants to unmute themselves and ask Sotirios a question. So, okay, no, I'll wait. I have a question, but I can ask him. Anybody else have a question? Okay, thank you.
Has the harvest index changed over time?
Did you hear that, Sotirios? The question was, has the harvest index changed over time?
The answer is yes, it has changed by about 15% over the last 40 years. It has changed, but still the stover is going up.
So I have, I think, maybe two questions. One is, when you showed your yield predictions at the state level or then on the county, did you change the cultivars throughout time?
Yes, every 5 years to keep up with genetics.
Okay. And then the other one was, were you surprised that even though the yields increased, that your N loss continued to increase, that 0.8% a year?
So I was not surprised with that, Matt. And what we do with the crops, we can affect 100 days over the year, 120. There are periods in the fall and in the spring that we don't have crops, anything, and the nitrate there is very susceptible to amount of precipitation we're gonna get.
Great. Okay, in the interest of time, let's move on to Dr. Crystal Liu. And so Sotirios, Crystal, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah.
Now we're going to look a little at some watershed, I think some delivery scale modeling that Dr. Liu and her research group have done. So thanks, Sotirios, that's really important. And maybe there'll be some questions at the end. And with that, Crystal, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt. And I'm sorry I cannot be there in person. I'm in Chicago at AGU, so I have to give the talk online. And it's really nice to talk after Sotirios, and he did a really good job to explaining modeling work. So you guys now may have a rough impression, like if we want to run a model, what we need, and also those data model comparison challenges. So here today, I'm gonna briefly talk some recent progress we have made in simulating water and nitrogen movement at the delivery scale. So first of all, I'd like to thank my funding agency, my team member, and collaborators. And this project is primarily supported by Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and we have some partial support from National Science Foundation. And most of the heavy lifting work has been done by my former PhD student, current postdoc in my lab, Peiyu Cao. And also our collaborators, including Dr. Bill Crompton, David Green, Greg Stenback, and Matt Helmers, give us lots of support in those data and measurements, local knowledge, background information. So it's really nice to see those close collaboration between modeler and field scientists. So this is the model we are using, and different from crop model. This is a land ecosystem model, which is also process-based. It is called Dynamic Land Ecosystem Model, DLAM. So I am one of major developers since my PhD study. So it has been like, this is a 2-decade efforts from a group of researchers. And this model is a typical land ecosystem model, but we incorporate river network and in-stream process into that. So for example, when we do the model simulation, we divide the entire land surface into lots of grid cells with the same size. And within each grid cell, we have a design of a cohort structure. So we simulate both agriculture lands and non-agriculture lands. So within each pixel, it is allowed to have a coexistence of various land cover types, such as forests, grassland, wetlands, croplands, and urban areas. And in this model, the grid cell is not isolated. So it is allowed to connect with the neighboring grid cells so that we can track water and nutrient flow from, like, for example, from the agriculture lands in the Midwest all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So, and also this model also do the estimation about greenhouse gas emissions, such as nitrous oxide, methane, and carbon dioxide fluxes. And in this project, we have made a number of fine-scale model improvements. I will talk more details in the rest of the slides. And here I will give you a quick demonstration about our input drivers. So what do we need to feed into the model? Simply put, we need to tell the model what has happened on the land surface. So before setting up a model run, we need to develop those input drivers to characterize the natural changes, including daily climate information, atmospheric composition, as well as human activities. So we need to characterize how humans use and manage land, water, nutrient, and other resources, especially in such a heavily managed system like Corn Belt area. So we have those time series maps of land use and cover changes, crop type and distribution maps. And my group also developed the fertilizer use and manure application history. I'm so glad to hear Sotirios also use our data as input. And yeah, we also have input data of tillage intensity, tile drainage, river networks, and some static information such as soil property, so that at this, and also the topography information. So at this, that part that is very similar to ABSIM. And so this is the model results, what we have for the entire Mississippi River Basin. So in the Mississippi River Basin, we do the simulation at a resolution of about 9 km by 9 km. So here you can see this is a data model comparison at the monthly time step at the left and daily time step at the right. And we have the comparison between data and model in terms of water discharge and nitrogen loading. So overall, this model can well capture the interannual and intra-annual variability of water and nutrient movement at such a large scale. So like for this monthly comparison, we have nearly 4-decade records. And for the daily comparison, that's about like a 10-year record. If you are familiar with the modeling approach, one of the important challenges we have is the uncertainty from scaling. So usually when we use the data, measurement data to constrain model behavior, mostly the data we get is at these two scales. So at the plot and field level, you will see some measurement data such as crop productivity, biomass production, nitrous oxide emission, or nitrogen leaching. So we pay more attention to those local biogeochemical processes. So on the other hand, if you have a watershed level data, you may see a lot of gauge station monitoring data for water quality. So the nitrogen loading data we get at the river gauge station is a mixed effect of local biogeochemical process, hydrological connectivity, and the in-stream process. So for us as modeler, it's really difficult to identify like in which process your model results is biased. So if you see data model mismatch at this level. And so in this project, we work on delivery scale, which is the scale between them. And in this scale is an ideal test bed that we can look at the nitrogen yield and the loading before it reaches the stream. So it can give us a better capability to identify, like if your model cannot match with observation, then what's the problem? And by excluding the in-stream process. And this is the project we have funded by INRC. And in this one, we have 4 delivery scale catchments in Iowa. And I have to say thank Dr. Bill Crompton. And I first heard the concept of a delivery scale from him. And thanks to him and his team, they have accumulated a long-term water quality monitoring data at this scale. And they have daily to weekly discharge and nitrate loading, nitrate concentration data since 2015 for all these 4 catchments. And to capture the spatial heterogeneity, we have to develop the input data at a 30-meter resolution, including weather condition, catchment characteristics, and management practices. So I have to say this is the finest model simulation I have ever handled in my career. It's really a challenge. And this is some basic information for these 4 catchments. The drainage area is very small, range from 2 to 5 square kilometers. And they are typical agriculture dominated catchments. So we have the row crop area percentage ranging from 80 to 90%. And each of them have like 9 to 19 fields. And we have the tile drainage within the catchments. But for 2 of them, has tile drainage coverage close to like 50 to 60%, and the other 2 close to 90%. So they are intensively tile drained. And then we have 2 of them located in Des Moines lobe. So they have around less than 10% of farmed borehole, but that's a spatial extent to change the year by year, depending on how much precipitation received. And in each paired catchment, we have 1 of them with a cover crop planting. with the area percentage close to adoption percentage close to 50 to 85%. But the cover crop was only implemented since 2017. So here I put an image of around Ames. So you may be familiar with this agricultural landscape. Then each patch is the corn and soybean fields with a color. And the question we want to take a look is that if we have a model that is well calibrated in a large region, such as Mississippi River Basin, can we use that to simulate the fine scale water and nutrient movement dynamics in such a small area? I can give you some numbers, like for the Mississippi River Basin, when we do the simulation, the spatial resolution is 9 kilometers to 9 kilometers. So it's around 80 square kilometers. But here for each catchment, as here, RS, I put here as example, that's less than 5 square kilometers. So for the entire study region, that's about 5% of the 1 grid cell we have in Mississippi simulations. So you want to break that down and to look at those details, and that's give us lots of a headache. So this is the first simulation results we get for the RS catchment in 2015 without doing any model improvement. So you can see the results, the model results is poor. And we have the observation data represented by the red dots. So the model is blue line. We cannot catch the occurrence of the peak flow and the magnitude. And for the base flow, it's not very good. And especially for the snow melting period in early spring, you can see from observation, there's a few peak flows, but from model results, none of them can show these peaks. So we have to go back to our catchment and talk to our field scientists within the team and to identify those major mechanisms we have missed in our large scale model, but that are very critical for the fine scale water and nutrient movement dynamics. So here I present 3 things, but in Pei's dissertation, we discussed more of them. So one thing we identified is a prairie pothole, because in this area, from this map, you can see we have lots of farmed ponds. So those small ponds, if you receive large precipitation, those small ponds will be filled up, and the excessive water may be spilled over and flow to other downstream prairie potholes. So it's like we have a system that is very spongy. It can store water, so it slows down the surface runoff. And on the other hand, we have a tile pipeline buried under the soil, and it makes the excessive water drains out quickly. So it's like we have even more leaky system. So how do we use a model to represent the water dynamics and the nutrient transport in such a system that is both spongy and leaky? And the third thing I want to mention is about the variation in land cover and management. Although I have talked about the small research area, it is small for me. Like a modeler, I usually do those national and regional simulations. So like several square kilometers, that's too small for us. And we never go zoom in to such a small area. But when we look at the 30-meter data sets, we still see large spatial and temporal variations in the land cover and management. For example, for fertilizer use, and we see like several fold difference in those nearby fields. So first of all, we improved model representation for the hydrological process and the nitrogen transformation process associated with the soil roughness, snow process, pothole, and tile drainage. And so here is a bird view of a conceptual catchment. So you can see for the lower panel, so each box is a 30 meter by 30 meter grid cell. And we have croplands and other land cover types within them. And the water from each grid cell is allowed to move to 8 directions to its neighboring grid cells. And we also separate water flow into surface runoff, tile flow, and subsurface flow. So nitrogen leached from soil will travel along with them with a different flow velocity. And since those flow has different residence time, the nitrogen traveled with them will have different decay rate. So eventually at the catchment outlets, we can quantify how much nitrogen loading is delivered by each flow and what's the relative contribution from each flow. And thanks to Matt Helmus and his team, so we receive much improved information for those farming practices. So we know like which field, how people manage their lands in each field. And like for fertilizer use and manure application, we know how much nitrogen is applied in what type, when, and in which field, whether it's far or close to the catchment outlets. So all those information are super helpful for us to constrain model estimates and make it close to the daily dynamics revealed by observation data. So this is what we have for water discharge. And I hope you still remember the bad performance image I just showed you a few minutes ago. And this one, in this one, we have a much improved model results. That blue dash line is observation. So you can see for all the 4 catchments, the model results can well reproduce the daily dynamics of flows, and we can also predict the occurrence of peak flows and also for the magnitude of base flow. And this one is nitrate concentration. And I have to say nitrate concentration in water is a hard nut to crack for all the modeling teams. So that's most of us would like to show our nitrate loading results because if you have a relatively okay estimation for your discharge, your nitrogen loading results would be okay because the water discharge is super dominant in calculating nitrogen loading. But we barely show the nitrate concentration result. So here we are satisfied with these results for those 4 catchments, and we can capture those within year variation of nitrate concentration. So statistically, the result is ranging from satisfactory to very good for 5 years daily comparison. But we also have some data model mismatch. So like those mostly come from the extremely dry period. So from monitoring data, we see the water flow dries up and nitrogen concentration drop down a lot. But from our model results, because these 2 catchments has like half area of non-tile drained. So we still see some slow flow in these 2 catchments. That's why we have relative high estimates for nitrate concentration. So you can see there's still some uncertainty coming from input data. And then this is our daily nitrate loading comparison with the measurements, which is shown as the black circle. So the stacked area is nitrate loading from different flow. So what you can see here is like for this small catchment, tile flow play a super important role in the blue color. Like it's contribute close to 70 to 90% of the nitrogen loading, while surface runoff only play a role when there is a peak flow. So although nitrate concentration in surface runoff could be very low, but because of a water discharge level in surface runoff is higher in such peak flow events, so which gives us a higher contribution from surface runoff in such events. And one last thing I want to show about our model results is the spatial heterogeneity. And our field scientists can see the difference in nitrogen loading year by year from the monitoring data. But what has happened within the field and who is the dominant behind scene driver for such differences? That's something we cannot know from the monitoring data. So from such modeling work, we sort of opening the black box. So you can see like which area contribute more nitrogen. And if you want to dig deeper, then you can see some, by comparing the four catchments, then we may have some idea like which area is more stable in retaining nitrogen under various climate scenarios, or which area should be our priority place to improve management for reducing nitrogen loading. So this is something, we want to continue pushing forward. So I want to stop here, and I'm open to any question. And if any of you have more interest in knowing our work or want to discuss more details of those nitrate loading modeling, please feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, thanks for your attention.
All right, thanks, Crystal. Are there questions from in the room or online? You got one, John? No, okay. Crystal, are you going to start looking at the impact of some of the in-field management practices and the impact that may have on watershed scale delivery?
Yes, that's our next step plan. And we want to know, we want to do some further scenario analysis and see if we can have a higher cover crop adoption, or if we can reduce nitrogen fertilizer use in some priority areas. Can we get those low-hanging fruits in reducing nitrogen loading, cleaning water? Yeah.
And then one more question. Is this one of the first inclusions of tile drainage explicitly including tile drainage in DLEM?
In our earlier version for Mississippi River Basin, we already include tile drainage, but not at this scale.
Okay.
So yeah, we have some algorithm to speed up subsurface flow. But yeah, at this level, I have to see, we also compare some observation data to separating flows. So I think this one, in this work, we have more confidence in our estimation of tile flow and other water flows.
There was a question that came in on the chat, which was, how was the model spatial resolution selected? And what would be the effect of using smaller computational elements?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So we select a 30-meter resolution based on CDL data, crop data layer, and which is from USDA. So that data provide us annual time series of crop type and distribution. So that's our baseline to build up all the other input data. And so for the, I think for this several square kilometer catchments at 30-meter resolution, we already have around several thousand gray cells. So although they only have less than 20 fields. So from my point of view, I think the spatial heterogeneity should be good enough for such an area. Yeah.
How long did it take the model to run?
Yeah, that's a good question. That so far, it took us 2 to 3 hours to finish one simulation for 20 computational year for 20 years. So if you want to get longer years, then like starting from 1900, that would be like 1 day, about 1 day.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, let's thank either virtual clap or for those in the room, a round of applause. Thanks, Crystal and Sotirios. And
Thank you.
just as a reminder, these will be archived. Somebody else has a recording since my computer ran out of storage space. And all the previous seminars have been recorded as well. So thank you. Thank you both for the excellent presentations. I hope that folks found the modeling discussion interesting, and it's great to hear the expertise that we have on campus. Thanks, Sotirios and Crystal.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, just a second. If anybody's on here for, thanks, Kay. If anybody is on here for a CEU, because there could be a CCA CEU, you need to email Kay Stefanik, KCSTEFAN@iastate.edu by tomorrow at noon with your name, the name you entered to watch the seminar, and your CCA number. So thank you. All right, now we can be done, right? Okay, thanks everyone. I did before. Yeah, I can't remember who it is, but yes, in February. Okay, thanks.